Hey YouTube, Kiritwick here, bringing you all my Solfachord Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck profile. Wanted to do a deck profile on the Solfachords for a good while now. Just, had to gather up the cards. A lot of the cards from Ancient Guardians just haven't been, reprinted yet. The Ogdoadics, the Ursartics, and the Solfachords were just kind of overlooked because they weren't really too meta-defining. But this was a pendulum deck that focuses on utilizing different monster effects based on if you have an odd or even pendulum scale, depending on the Solfachord monster, and then being able to make use of these fairy pendulums with some of the other fairy engine that we run in the deck. So finally happy that I've been able to gather a good amount of the cards for a deck profile. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So we'll go ahead and start off with the actual Solfachord main deck monsters, because we do have some link monsters that are Solfachords as well in the extra deck. But for the main deck monsters, we have two copies of Do Solfachord Coolio. So I think they all go off of the Do, Re, Mi, So, La, Fi, To. I might have just butchered that. But the musical chords. So two copies of our boss monster, Do Solfachord Coolio. If your opponent cannot activate spell or trap cards or monster effects when your Solfachord Pendulum monster is Pendulum Summon. And also, you can special summon this card from your hand by attributing to Pendulum monsters. You can use each of the following effects of Coolio once per turn. You can target one face-up card your opponent controls, or up to two cards if you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone. Negate its effects until the end of your opponent's turn. When an effect of a monster on the field is activated with an equal or lower attack than the highest pendulum scale in your pendulum zone times 300, you can destroy that monster. So more destruction and card effect negations thanks to this card. That can be summoned just by attributing out to pendulum monsters. So if you perform your pendulum summon, you can then summon out your Coolio using those monsters as well. Since your Coolio is a level 8 monster, you can't normally pendulum summon it out with the scales we have in the deck. Also running two copies of T Solfachord Butea. Your opponent cannot activate spell or trap or monster effects when your Solfachord Pendulum monster is Pendulum Summon, having the same low scale pendulum effect when it's in the scale. But quick effect, you can target one effect monster your opponent controls, or if you have an even pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, you can target one face-up spell or trap your opponent controls this turn. Banish it when it leaves the field. You can use this effect of T Solfachord Butea once per turn, and once per turn at the start of damage step if this card battles a monster with an equal or higher attack than the lowest pendulum scale in your pendulum zone times 300, destroy that monster. All of them focusing on different monster effects based on the pendulum scales as well for the attack boost to be gained. With the other, Solfachord monster we run for the bigger monster effects being one Fa Solfachord Foncia. Pendulum summons of your Solfachord Pendulum monsters cannot be negated. It's a scale 5, so a little more specifics for the scales to use. When you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, if your Solfachord Pendulum monster be destroyed by battle, you can destroy this card instead. More of a monster protection effect with this card, and during your main phase, you can add one Solfachord Pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck face up, except for Fancia. You can only use this effect of Fancia once per turn. Not as the important of the Solfachord setup cards, that's why we're only running the one-of copy. More of a specific card to go into when need be. But for our bigger setups for our Solfachord monsters, 3 copies of Solfachord Dreamia. Pendulum summons of your Solfachord monsters cannot be negated, and being one of our higher scale monsters to use if you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone. If a Solfachord monster you control would be destroyed by your opponent's card effect, you can destroy this card instead of one of those cards. And if you control a Solfachord card in your pendulum zone, you can special summon this card from your hand, giving you that extra resource to be able to summon out onto the field, because then you can use your Solfachord Dreamia along with one of your normal summoned or other special summon monsters to then get out your Link 2 Grand Solfachord Musetia for your Link monster before you go for your Pendulum Summon, giving you some Link arrows to then use for the ones you build up in your extra deck. And then also I want to run 3 copies of Do Solfachord Cutia, but I have one Mi Solfachord Elitia. I don't normally run this card in the deck, but still just an added backup to use. But you do want to run 3 Cutia. Pendulum summons of your Solfachords cannot be negated, being your scale 8. You can use it to help get out some of your higher level Solfachord monsters for your Pendulum Summon also. And while you have an even Pendulum scale in your Pendulum Zone, Solfachord Pendulum monsters you control gain attack equal to times 100 times their own Pendulum scale. And if this card is normal or special summon, you can add one Solfachord Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, except for Do Solfachord Cutea. So this card being able to just be a search for your Solfachord monster means you can have your scale set up, use Cutea, to then add a Solfachord monster from your deck to your hand, except UTS, you can add your Dreamia, and then you can special summon your Dreamia onto the field if you have your scale set up to then be able to go into your Link 2 also. I also run 2 copies of Solfachord Gracia. Your opponent can activate spell or trap effects when a Solfachord Pendulum is Pendulum Summoned, and when you have an even Pendulum scale in your Pendulum Zone. If your Solfachord Pendulum monster attacks, your opponent can activate monster effects until the end of damage step. If this card's normal or special summon, you can add 1 Solfachord spell or trap from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Gracia once per turn, but search power for our Solfachord spell or traps, which we do run a good variety of in the deck as well for those cards. Having search thanks to our level 5 Solfachord monster as well. And then also the 2 copies of La Solfachord Angelia for the last of our Solfachord monsters that we run. While you have an odd pendulum scale, if your Solfachord pendulum monster attacks, your opponent can activate spell or trap or effects until the end of damage step. During your main phase, you can tribute 1 Solfachord pendulum monster even if face down. And if you do special summon 1 Solfachord pendulum monster from your deck whose scale is 2 higher or 2 lower than the monster, except for La Solfachord Angelia. So we have a good variety of different ones as well for all of the odd level ones. I would say that's why Fancy is just a 1 of. It's kind of the outlier for our Solfachord monsters since we have 5, 7, and then 1 being the good variety for our different monsters to be able to use with this card for the tribute to summon out 1 higher or 3, and then also having the option for these summons to use depending on that monster. But even if we were to go for the level 2 options, we do have the 2 higher in the form of Dreamia being able to go into Fancia as well for that play. And then you have that options for your even ones having the odd pendulum scales as well. So remember that as well with some of the easier ways to remember these Solfachord monsters. The even level monsters have the odd pendulum scales, and then the odd pendulum scale monsters have the even scales. Best way to remember that. For some of the other fairy monsters in the deck, 3 copies of Diviner of Herald. This is a card that was recently reprinted in the Terminal Revenge set, but if it's normal or special summon, you can send 1 fairy monster from your deck or extract to the graveyard, and if you do, this turn is basically this card's monster. You increase the level of this monster by the sent monster until the end of this turn, and if it's tributed, you can special summon 1 level 2 or lower fairy monster from your hand or deck, except for Diviner of the Herald. So what I like about this is for your bigger boss monster, Do Solfachord Coolia, you can special summon it by tributing out the 2 pendulum monsters for the play, but the big setup here also comes down to the level adjustment that you can do for your Diviner of the Herald, and being able to even go for just a tribute summon for your bigger monster, because if you go for the pendulum summon or just the summon of your bigger monster on the field, you can use the summon of your Diviner of the Herald to then tribute out your Coolia, giving you the search of a level 2 or lower fairy monster from your hand or deck to for this search to special summon. So you can special summon cards like Dreamia onto the field thanks to this card also. But the cards you want to send off of the Diviner of the Herald come in the form of our Trias Heracea. During your main phase, if this card's in your hand or graveyard, you can tribute up to 3 fairy monsters, special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field, so that can be another tribute for your Diviner of the Herald as well. And then you can apply the following effects in sequence, depending on when they happen for the tribute cards. 2 or more, destroy 1 card your opponent controls, or 3, draw 2 cards. So with this card tributing up to 3 fairy monsters, you can send it off of your Diviner of the Herald, giving you the special summon from the graveyard of your Heracea, and then have the search of your level 2 Do Solfachord monster on the field as well to set up. And then also 2 copies of our Protecting Spirit Logeth. If this card on the field is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target 1 monster on the field. It cannot be destroyed by battle this turn. You can always each of the following effects of Logeth once per turn. If an effect of a fairy monster you control is activated except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, and you can target 1 face-up card your opponent controls and 1 attack position monster you control. Banish that opponent's card, and if you do, change that monster to defense. So just another resource to grab onto the field while this card is in your hand. The big card you'll send to the graveyard is your option for your Heracea to send, and then also with this card, being able to special summon the Logeth as just an extra resource on the field for you to use. And then for the spells, running 3 copies of the Solfachord Elegance. Activate 1 of these effects. You place 1 Solfachord Pendulum from your deck in your Pendulum Zone. So search power, being able to set up that Pendulum scale. Or you can add 1 Solfachord Pendulum monster from your hand to your extra deck. Face up, then place 2 Solfachord Pendulum monsters, 1 odd and 1 even, from your deck in your Pendulum Zone. Setting up all your needed effects for your varying Solfachord monsters, since you'll have both the even and odd scales for this card. And also just needing those setup is why this card is a definite Definite 3 of, or add 2 cards, 1 odd and 1 even pendulum scale from your pendulum zones to your extra deck face up and draw 2 cards. More and more setup makes it one of the best cards in the deck for that setup also. I also run 2 copies of Solfachord Harmonia. You can activate one of these effects with this field spell. You add 1 face-up Solfachord Pendulum from your extra deck to your hand. More recycle power. Increase the pendulum scale of 1 Solfachord card in your pendulum zone by its level this turn. So being able to increase the scale does give us access to Yugioh for a pendulum summon depending on the scale we have for that card as well. Because then if we control the pendulum monster, increasing its scale by 1 for its level, so your Yugioh will then become a scale 9 for this card. Or if you control a pendulum monster card with at least 3 different even pendulum scales or at least 3 different odd pendulum scales, destroy 1 card your opponent controls. More destruction on top of the other fairy cards we run also. I also run 2 copies of Solfachord Symphony. Apply these effects in sequence based on the number of face-up Solfachord pendulum monsters with different names in your extra deck. 3 or more Solfachord pendulums you control gain attack equal to their own pendulum scale times 300 for an added attack bonus. 5 or more, you can destroy 1 card your opponent controls. Then if you have an odd pendulum scale in your pendulum zone, draw 1 card. Or 7 or more, special summon 1 Grand Solfachord monster from your extra deck, giving you access to the link monsters even without having to go into a link summon. I also run 2 copies of Celestial Transformation, just another way to grab some of the bigger monsters before our pendulum summon onto the field from our hand, and also 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity, just to open up into the more needed cards for the plays for the decks, with some of our 1-ofs for the spells being 1 copy of 1 for 1, just because it's very important to grab our Yugioh for our play on the field, getting that additional search as well. The 1 copy of Triple Tactics Talent, and then the 1 Call by the Grave for the rest of the spells, with our traps being 1 copy of Solfachord Formal for our counter trap. While you have a Solfachord card in your pendulum zone, when your opponent activates a spell or trap or monster effect, shuffle 1 face-up pendulum from your extra deck into the deck, then apply the effects. Pendulum monsters you control are affected by that effect. Cards in your pendulum zone cannot be destroyed by card effects, or cards in your pendulum zone cannot be banished by that effect. So then you have more of those options for this counter trap. And then the 1 Solfachord Musica, being able to activate one of these effects based on the pendulum scales as well, being able to either special summon 1 face-up pendulum Solfachord or with an odd scale from your extra deck, even special summon the opposite added scale from your deck, or even an odd, target 1 card your opponent controls and destroy it for added destruction effect with our traps. And then 2 copies of Pendulum Reborn, being able to special summon 1 face-up pendulum monster from our extra deck, or 1 pendulum monster from our graveyard. Added resource depending on where that pendulum monster we may be also. And then for the extra deck, running 2 copies of Grand Solfachord Museshia, needing 2 pendulum monsters with this card. During your main phase, you can add 1 pendulum monster from your hand to the extra deck, face up, and 1 face-up pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, swapping out the needed scales you may need for your Grand Solfachord monsters, as long as one of them has an even pendulum scale and the other has an odd. And when a pendulum summon of a Solfachord monster, you can target one of them, add 1 Solfachord pendulum from your deck to your hand, whose level equals the pendulum scale of that monster. So search power depending on the scale you add as well. It all comes down to just remembering, because all of their levels for their scales basically line up with each other as well, with your level 3 scale being able to be searched out. It all comes down to just knowing the search for the monster you want to go for. I also run 2 copies of Grand Solfachord Yugioh with this Link 3 monster, needing 2 or more monsters, including a pendulum monster, so we can even go for our other monsters for that summon if need be, as long as we have the 1 pendulum monster. Gains 100 attack for each face-up pendulum in your extra deck. The effects of activated pendulum monsters this card points to cannot be negated. Once per turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect, quick effect, you can special summon 1 Solfachord card with an odd pendulum scale from your pendulum zone to zone this card points to. If you do negate the activation, then you can add 1 Solfachord pendulum monster with an even scale from your deck face up to your extra deck, setting up those odd scales to be able to search out the even scales thanks to this card. And then for the other link monsters, 1 Beyond the Pendulum, 1 Exceed the Pendulum, 1 Zephyra Metaltron, 1 Relinquished Anima, and 1 Cross Sheep, with some of the other bigger monsters that we go into being our Herald of Mirage Light, 1 Nightmare Unicorn, the 1 Boral Sword Dragon, and the 1 Underworld Goddess, with our Exceed monsters being the 1 number 11 Big Eye and the 1 Typhoon Sky Crisis. You won't go in and do rank 7s as often. You have just the option available to you with the Loageth that we have in the deck, as well as one of the more easier special summons. And then as for some of the go-to plays in the deck, I would say this is a pretty complicated deck just for memorizing a good variety of the scales, the levels, and basically remembering the evens and odds for all of them as well. But one of the more simpler plays to remember for your setup is just for the fact that with your Yugioh being summoned, well, you have an even pendulum scale. Solfachord monsters gain the attack boost, but when this card is normal or special summon, you can add one Solfachord pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, except for Yugioh. So then you can use this card to add your Dreamia from your deck to your hand, and then you just need that odd pendulum scale for that monster for the added protection effects. But if you control a Solfachord card in your pendulum scale, which you'll just need that added setup, that's where our very important spell comes into play as well. So you'll have the activation of this card, placing or adding one Solfachord pendulum monster from your hand to your extra deck, or then place one or two Solfachord pendulum monsters. So if you have your bigger Solfachord card in your hand, you can place that face up in the extra deck, and then you get your two scales needed, the one even and the one odd. So you can set up your odd being your Yugioh, and then the other being your even, being your Yugioh, just so you have the bigger, wide variety of scales to be able to make use of as well. Being able to place those cards one and even from your deck, as long as you have that resource to use, then you can special summon the Dreamia from your hand, go for the Link to play, being your Grand Solfachord Musician. For this play, during your main phase, you can add one pendulum monster from your hand to the extra deck, and then one face-up pendulum from your extra deck to your hand. So the play here is that you can't really make use of the Yugioh for the summon, so you can add that back to your hand if you have the swap. Otherwise, you'll go for the pendulum summon of your Angelia and your Dreamia, since these scales match up with their levels, for you to be able to summon back onto the field as well. Since you have the odd pendulum scale with the Angelia, while you have an odd pendulum scale, your monster attacks cannot activate your spell traps for your opponent for your cards, but being able to make use of the special summon of your Solfachord pendulum from your deck during your main phase to tribute a Solfachord pendulum monster, so that you can tribute your Dreamia, and then grab your level 4, being the one of that we spoke of before, for your Solfachord cards, being your Fancia on the field as well. And then you can add one pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck face up, except for Fancia, being able then to add the needed monsters you may need for some of your other Solfachord plays. And then from there, you can go for the Link 3 play and build up for more and more of your higher monster plays. But that was it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed. Definitely a complicated deck, but a fun pendulum one at that, once you learn all of the ins and outs for this pendulum summon deck to be able to use. And as always, until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.